Forest Rangers of Reddit, what is the creepiest/strangest experience you've had while on the job? Not a forest ranger but prior Marine, we were doing amphibious landings and set up to rack out on the beach. I woke up and walked over the sand dune to take a piss in the middle of the night when I saw a squad of recon guys geared up with night vision goggles maybe 10 feet away from me. I said what pretty loudly and none of them said anything. I walked up to one guy and had to physically touch him before he said they were practicing on us. I told my platoon commander about it and the next day he told me they failed because I noticed them. Startled the shit out of me though, I was halfway through my piss before my eyes adjusted enough to notice 10 or so guys just watching it go down. Would have died for sure. Had campers who honked at a moose. The moose took this as a mating call and proceeded to mate with their car. I'm a forester for the U.S. Forest Service in Northern California. I've never had anything like supernatural type creepy happen to me. But it always creeps me out a little bit when I come across a kill site from a mountain lion. When you're by yourself in the woods you're just another link in the food chain but you don't really think about it until you come across a half-eaten deer and realize a huge cat killed this thing with its face. As for the strangest thing, that would be the time I thought I was about to see a plane crash. As usual I was working alone on a remote hillside and I saw a plane, like a full-size commercial plane flying below the ridgeline between mountains. I thought it was going to crash for sure. But it didn't. It just weaved through and kept going. I thought it was weird it didn't have any logos or writing on it. Come to find out we were close to an Air Force base and they were training pilots for Afghanistan and this was not a totally uncommon thing to see in the area. When I was working for a federal government land management agency in Montana a few years back, something really creepy came over the repeater network. While we were working in a canyon that had very poor radio reception, we heard a very long, creepy, and drawn-out moan come over the air. This was followed by a very weak, in both reception and tone, "Help, me." In a woman's voice. All of us freaked out. These weak cries for help kept repeating low guttural "help me" until dispatch finally stepped in and said this is a federal emergency network. Unless you have an emergency, get off this channel. This was followed by another plea for help, then a gunshot and screaming. Turns out two local crazies were out four-wheeling, going straight up steep embankments, when the ATV flipped backwards, pinning the man under the ATV. Both of them being high on some substance, they started freaking out. The man, being perfectly fine, except for being pinned by the leg and high, started to hallucinate that he was bleeding out, pulled out his handgun and shot himself to make it quicker. Because they were four-wheeling so far back in the sticks, a helicopter was needed to retrieve the body. I was with a group of friends heading to the beach. Most of them split off to the shortcut by walking around the lake. Me and another two guys walked along the road to stop in at the shop on the way. Eventually we get to the beach. Our friends should have been there 15 minutes earlier. We were at the usual spot but ended up walking up and down the whole beach, about 2 kilometers. They were nowhere. We divided to walk back. Maybe they went home or got into trouble. Our high school backed onto the lake and they would have walked behind it. Next to the high school there was a couple of sports fields. We were about to cross the football field when we seen emergency services up the other end. One of the guys we were in panicked and started running towards it. Two of his cousins were part of the group. We got there but our mates weren't there. The other guy we were with stupidly asked a cop if someone had died. The cop scolded him and looked visibly shaken. We ended up having to go home the other way. Got back to find out our friends had found a 3-year-old Aboriginal girl floating in the water. The girl had a mental disability and wandered off days earlier. Her family didn't even report her missing. It still sticks with me almost 20 years later. I'm sure the other guys are somewhat messed up about it too. I'm just glad I wanted a bottle of Coke that day because I'm not sure how I would have handled it. At the time I was a boy in my own little happy world. Not a ranger, just work with them. Where we are at, mountain lions are a big issue and their numbers were getting too rampant so we had to cull them. The guy was out with his dogs and let them go. They're all GPS tagged and collared, and most went after one lion and the lone dog went the other way. Most of the rangers went after the group of dogs while the other guy had to go get the lone dog. He follows the GPS tracker and stops. It's a cave. He just stared at it and was like, well, my dog is dead. But the state requires him to get proof so he leaned in to find out. The dog was buried in the snow, still breathing, and the ranger found himself face to face with the cougar. Obviously it attacked, he killed it. They carry weapons after all, and he got his dog out. Last I heard, that dog is still helping tree cougars. I'm not a park ranger, but I've done a lot of work out in them. For 5 years I was commissioned to install staircases as part of an art installation. It was about the destruction of our environment for the need of our ever-expanding need for homes. We did hundreds of these things in various states of decay. Some look new, some we tried to make look hundreds of years old. Don't think they ever took them down, so if you ever see them now you know why. Totally safe to walk up to, great views from the top. My friend and I were going through a more secluded part of the woods off of the trail. We planned to head back soon since the sun was setting and shadows were getting longer. I know it doesn't sound like much, but understand that everything gets creepier when you're surrounded by miles of forest. Then, we noticed it. In the distance was a small wooded platform, a bit rundown. It looked like a man-made structure, completely out of place, and I'd never seen anything like it. I remember we approached with caution and even radioed it in. Apparently, nobody had ever seen it before or knew what we were talking about. We didn't have to get very close. The smell hit both of us like a freight train. I felt like I was going to puke. There are no words to sufficiently describe how foul it was. It was the scent of rotten flesh and death, but millions of times worse. At that point, we were both seriously spooked and decided to leave since it was getting late, plus we'd already reported it anyway. Found out that when rangers checked, they discovered a couple things. First, the scent was actually caused by severely mutilated small animal corpses, ravaged and left to rot around the mysterious platform. Next, they collected several bear set traps surrounding it. Even though there are no bears here, they uprooted the platform and found the entire thing was a trap, basically because the boards were weak and a deep pit had been dug underneath it with metal shards waiting at the bottom. Source: USFS Botanist. Haven't had major creepy experiences other than this, but be safe and take proper precautions when you're out there. There are weirdos. Don't know if I can comment, but I have a lame little story. Every summer I work on a national park just to get a little extra cash for college, so last year I decided to say FCK it and solo a 7-ish mile hike up the mountain to get back to my dorm. This is after having a few days off, and instead of being late the next day waiting for a ride, I decided I was gamed enough to venture the forest at night. So here I am alone crossing makeshift bridges, and going along a makeshift trail in the middle of a pitch-black evergreen forest. Along the way I come to a small rocky river bank. I look up and see a blood moon looming overhead. For some reason I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me, like I just messed up big time. Hours pass, in turn with me getting lost and my flashlight dying. I kept seeing a shadowy figure in my peripheral, pointing to something. Wasn't a good time, as I was already on the lookout for bears and mountain lions, plus being exhausted. I do a lot of solo hiking and I've seen some weird shit. I actually had a want moment this weekend, decided to wake up super early and hike into this a great little fishing spot in Uwharrie National Forest. Now I am probably a good 8 to 10 miles from anything or person. As I come over this hill I see a hoodie hanging up about 25 feet in a tree and an axe head at the base of the tree. The hoodie was on a branch that couldn't have been thrown or even placed up there if someone climbed. The limb would have snapped. I just took the safety of my pistol and kept walking. Nothing you can really do that far out. I was young, maybe 12 or 13, and lived in the country. The roads are set up in 1 mile grid patterns, so you've got a square mile of woods behind most people's houses in that area. I was wandering and followed a trail to a small, kinda rundown house in the woods with smoke in the chimney. Probably 10 or more junked out cars in the trees, 100 feet from the house. My idiot self actually went up and was looking for cool shit in the cars. I didn't realize until way later that I could have been shot by a moonshiner. Not a forest ranger, but worked in Canadian forestry as a tree planter for many summers. The weirdest thing I saw, I call forest carpets. Basically an animal that has decomposed except for its hair, leaving a completely flat, moist blanket of hair on the ground. 6th year park ranger here who does tons of solo hikes in remote wilderness. I also do a lot of astrophotography and hike at night quite often. Nothing, really. I work as a forester in northern Alberta, Canada. One of the weirder things I've found was an old rusted toboggan in an area of forest that had recently been harvested. It had obviously been there before the forest was cut, because it had about 3 inches of soil on top of most of it with plants growing out of it. This was also 15 to 20 kilometers off the highway, and not near any well-used trails or roads. I worked as a botanist for the Park Service. As a scientist you still wear the uniform. My field partner and I were surveying some plants and a super old dude walks up. We chat a bit and he tells us he's in his 80s and been hiking there forever. He seems pretty tough and with it from the conversation. Cut to an hour or two later, he's on his way back, but his pants have disappeared and he's just wearing a, thankfully, long tank top, no pants or underwear. He waves and keeps going. Since you can only be cited for being naked in parks if someone complains, we wave and continued surveying plants. Never really figured out what happened, maybe an restroom emergency or he just wanted to feel the breeze. Not a ranger, but did a lot of camping and hiking in my 20s. Worst story for me was when 3 bears entered our campsite at like 2 o'clock in the morning when we were sleeping in a tiny little tent. Pitch black outside, but we were high up the mountain, so when laying in the tent, you could see the moonlight filtering through the thin plastic of the tent and the silhouettes of the trees and stuff. So my friend and I were in one tent and the guys were in another tent a few feet away from us. We are awoken to banging sounds in the campsite, about 3 or 4 feet from where we are laying. We both looked at each other and held hands because it was loud. I was terrified to move because the sleeping bags would make that rustling sound if we moved. I swear to God, the bears were fascinated with our tent. Now, we did go through all the hassle of setting up a bear-proof camp, even washing the sunscreen off of us, putting food and self-care items and chapsticks and stuff in the food canister and such. We did everything we knew to do so that we did not smell good to bears, but I think just camping that far up gets their attention, period. These things literally were making grunting noises, throwing items around the camp, and rubbing themselves along the side of our tent. Like I could hear the sound of their bristled fur rubbing against the side of our tent over and over and over. I will never forget that sound. When I would open my eyes and look up, you could see their huge grunting silhouette rubbing against the side of the tent. It was like the scariest 30 minutes of my entire life. 3 gigantic bears were a mere inch away from me and the only thing that separated us was the thin plastic of the tent that they could shred in half a second. After what seemed like an eternity, they wandered away, and the guys came flying into our tent carrying the gun. We huddled there, all 4 of us like terrified schoolgirls, until the sun came up. When we took a look at the camp, everything that had been sitting out, mostly bags and clothes and non-food item stuff, was destroyed and scattered. I never went camping again after that experience. It terrified me. Before that, I never really thought what was out there. Now I know. I've been working at this park for a few years, and I've been having issues. It's this bear, and he isn't like any other bears. He steals picnic baskets from the campers. I have so many stories about delivering mail, but this is a shorter one. I was out in a residential neighborhood and as I was driving up the street, not a walking route, I see a customer waiting by his mailbox. I got to his house, said hello, and he told me that he was expecting a package to arrive today. I said, yes, you do, I have it right here. It was in a large padded envelope and I attempted to scan the package but the barcode wouldn't scan for some reason. I felt bad because I kept trying to get it to scan, and it wouldn't scan. I apologized, told him I would have to type the number in my hand. As I'm typing he says, "The package is not actually for me. It's for my wife. She went to one of those parties for adults." And then he suddenly got really embarrassed and started laughing nervously. I look again at the package and realize that through the padding is a large, dense object, shaped like a cylinder. I'm holding his wife's dildo. I think I said sarcastically, "Wow. I'm really happy for you guys," and drove to the next box. Not a forest ranger, but I was in the Black Hills of South Dakota in 2015 with some friends. We came into a clearing about 12 miles into a very remote part of the BH. There was a noose hanging in a tree. The rope was old and mossed over. No other evidence of humans around. Just plain creepy. Not a forest ranger but was camping and something growled at me from across the lake, then dove in and started swimming towards me like a maniac. Forester here, running into fresh mountain lion and bear scat in tracks is always creepy, but I'm most afraid of other people. I started carrying a gun, which is against my company's policy, after one particularly unsettling run-in. I normally work alone but on this day I had a coworker with me. I stepped out of his sight for a bathroom break. We were way off the grid, thought we were the only people for miles. All of the sudden I see a man standing motionless about 20 to 30 feet from me. It scared the shit out of me and I scream in obvious terror. He doesn't say a word, and I'll never be able to accurately describe the look on his face. It was pure evil. I could feel his intent. He takes a step towards me, at which point my co-worker yells, "Are you okay?" The guy then just turns around and walks away, disappearing back into the woods. I'm a woman BTW, and I know for a fact if I had been alone that day he would have assaulted me. Another creepy one was when I was patrolling in a swamp in SC and my boss just happened to fly overhead in a helicopter while conducting an aerial patrol. I could see him in the copter waving his arms. I'm waving back smiling like, "Hey buddy. I see you." My cell rings and it's my boss telling me to get back in my vehicle, amphibious Argo, because I'm walking towards a 10 to 12 feet alligator. Super creepy because God knows how many I'd been close to in the past. Not a normal day to have a helicopter scouting for me. Strangest thing I've come across was a huge pile of dental molds, like the kind orthodontists make, in the middle of nowhere. About 3 feet high, thousands of messed up grills. I love weird, random shit, so it made my day. I took like 30 of them and would randomly leave them around town with stupid quotes written on the bottom. Kept them stored in the driver's side door so people would be like, "WTF" when they noticed, lol. My friend that happened to be a dental assistant saw them one day and explained that they are expensive to dispose of. So a shady dentist just dumped them. Another time I had just stepped out of the woods when a fish dropped from the sky and landed right in front of me. I was super confused until I saw the hawk that was carrying it fly away. And lastly, this one happened to a co-worker. He walked past an old metal tub covered by plywood, lifted it to see what was underneath. It was full of dead dogs. People are real shit sometimes. I used to be a ranger for a cave park. One morning, I walked up to our caves to unlock them, as a lot of our caves are gated to protect them from vandalism. As I'm walking up, I feel just weird. I go unlock the cave, and as I head back down I realize that the metal boardwalk under my feet feels and sounds different. I walked up and down it a few times trying to figure out exactly what was different, but no luck. I decide to head back down to our visitor center and ask the first tour of the day to check on it and see if they notice anything. As I'm heading down the stairs I glanced back up at the cave, and the great big bloody bear that had been snoozing under the boardwalk sticks his head out. My dad is a park manager and one of the bathrooms was being used after hours. A few years ago, he was investigating what was going on for a few weeks, and before he found out who the culprit was, a couple was murdered in it. Not a ranger, but have spent much time in the forest. My father worked for the U.S. Forest Service. I was a kid in the 50s 60s, pre-cell phone, a lot fewer people and much less development. I have never feared animals at all, except for being stalked by a large group of foxes. I would welcome any paranormal stuff, but it never happened. What is scary is weather, the sudden harshness of cold, wind and rain, causing floods, slides and being lost. That can kill you in an instant. As a forest worker I actually have few creepy out stories. The biggest one was in northeastern BC, up near the Alberta border about as far north as Fort Nelson, but no summer roads because it is a giant swamp up there. We flew in with a helicopter and 2 of us girls got dropped in a block. The helicopter dropped us all first thing in the morning and was coming back in the afternoon because he had another job in the middle. So my partner goes one way to one end of the block and I head to the far end to start so we can work towards each other. I get down there and doing my thing and suddenly I hear screaming, yelling, swearing and just a lot of bad. All in a female voice. Now the lady I worked with was not a swearing person and I had never seen her angry, and this person was angry. I tried yelling back to see what was wrong. No actual answer. Then my partner radios me to find out what is wrong as she can hear this on the wind. I had to explain to her it was not me either. We decided to work together that day. It never quit until the helicopter came back and dropped off a load of our guys to help us finish up her block. Just before they landed we heard a couple of quads speed away in the bush. We ended up with about 15 people on that block to finish it. The helicopter flew around to find the person to see if they were in need of help, but could not even see a trail out of the block. The roads were through pure muskeg swamp and not even passable by foot due to standing water and quick mud. And saying that one is my creepiest I have even been shot at. Had a pack of wolves track me for hours after killing something in my block. Been stalked by bears, and found dead animals including the one that was gutted and dropped so close to the driver's door of our truck we had to crawl in from the passenger side, And my poor co-worker that I had to phone the RCMP for one day as he came back to the office freaked out because he found a couple of pairs of skeletal feet in running shoes one day. Turned out after some investigation someone had shoved bare paws in shoes, which just begs the question why? At least they were not human. This was in BC at the start of the feet washing up on shore on the coast too. Here's my forest story. I'm gonna keep it short and sweet, and I'm no ranger, but it's interesting reading these and I want to contribute. Me 2 years back living in a remote part of BC. I grew up in Toronto, so not having much experience with the wilderness and didn't know some of the smarter things to do with going on solo adventures, so I had a few days off and the water levels were really low, so I decided to go on a hike. The place I was living backed into Strathcona Provincial Park, and it has to be the most beautiful place I have ever witnessed. So the first day I make it about 2 hours into the bush and I get this strange feeling of unease. Now let me say, if you're out in the woods and you get this feeling, go with it. You're more in tune with nature being around so much of it. So being the city boy that I am, I went back down trail, to my car and went home. That evening I was kicking myself that I was a little BTCH, I should be a man, I should push past my fears and see nature in its purest form. The next day I'm gonna go double the distance, I'm gonna make it to the top of the mountain. I'm gonna do this. So without telling any of my friends I went back to the edge of the park, with a bag full of food and set off. I got to the section of weird feelings the day before, but this time I felt nothing. The water level was really low and I could walk along this lake where you usually couldn't access. I wasn't following a map and I was just enjoying the feeling of exploring in solitude. That when I got to this mouth of a glacial river, it wasn't warm enough to swim across and I had to cross it somehow, so I left the safety and openness and started up into the woods to find a place to cross. About 20 minutes upriver and into the bush I noticed this insanely thick fog like a foot off the ground. It was so dense and nothing like I ever had noticed before. I started swishing it around and it was honestly like a dream come true. Like it was so strange the way it just sat on the forest floor. Mind you, this was the daytime. And while dark under the forest canopy, it wasn't spooky. That's when my logical brain kicked in and I realized what was happening. I look a foot to my left and see where the fog was coming from. The forest floor, once the fog was pushed away from my hands, was actually massive logs on the ground running lengthwise, all perpendicular to each other. Such perfect placement in the woods is not something you want to see. A split second later I noticed the fog was coming from chimney out of the ground. The fog was smoke and to this day it was scentless. I swear scentless. It was billowing out of a pipe in the log, and that's when it hit me. I was in the middle of the bush in a normally inaccessible area and I was standing on top of a hidden underground house. I cautiously said hello while looking left and right for signs of a camp, and while hearing no response but some movement underneath I ran so fast. Words cannot describe how my brain and body was functioning. I don't think I could have ever ran that far distance without stopping normally. It was so weird and hard to rationalize where I was, or what could have happened. Once back to my car. It was straight out of a horror movie. I was trying to turn the ignition and it wouldn't start. More scared and in cell phone reception I called my homies in tears and told them to come help me. 40 minutes later there I'm high smoking that because Bud's sitting by the lake and the fear of everything had gone. We popped the hood and one of the connections to my battery terminal was disconnected. It could have been the bumpy road, but I don't know. In the following weeks, I hiked to the opposite side of the lake and with binoculars locate the river and watch it for movement and nothing. A month later we get some heavy rains and a man's body is found in the dam that had been pushed around in the whitewash for a few days. He's a homeless man that had been living in the woods. I take a few friends back to the spot later in the summer to discover the logs are moved away and a very small pit is underneath. But no signs of a camp. I'm relieved what or whoever was there is gone. But at the same time no one believes to me what happened. A coworker's boyfriend in earlier months vanished in that same forest. Just found his car on the edge of the woods but he never was found. I feel that something was watching me that first day. I don't know who, but since then I've never had the same feeling of primal fear wash over me in the woods. I am very lucky, whatever was under those logs in that underground hut didn't answer back. I learned that day to always hike with someone else. Tell people where you are going, and most of all, if you see a strange fog on the forest floor, don't play with it. Oh, and drugs are bad, MK. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.